Inside every museum is a hidden world. Now cameras are going behind the scenes at the Victoria and Albert Museum.
Wow, look at it, they're catching the light already.
Look at the company. Oh my goodness.
Home to more than 2 million wonders of art, design and performance.
Looks busting. He looks all right, doesn't he?
Oh, look at that. Bit of history.
It's not something I was expecting to ever come across in my life as a conservator.
This year, many of us have had to stay away. But behind closed doors, the work must go on.
And now I'm giving his nostril a good clean, because that was particularly dirty.
Tommy Tittlemouse is the only bear in our collection that gets birthday cards in a post addressed to him.
Inside the stores, new discoveries are being made.
It's like a collector's mark here, right in the middle of the drawing.
Isn't it weird?
Fragile treasures are being restored.
The problem with these is that they have been in storage for about 150 years.
And masterpieces brought to light.
You can almost see fingerprints on his buttock.
Yes. Preserving the best of the old and the new for all of us.
We need to make sure that in 100 years' time, our grandchildren will also be able to enjoy them.
Many of the V&A's greatest treasures were never intended to become works of art in a museum.
I think some of the most special things in the V&A are actually the things which weren't made to last. The temporary things, the throwaway things, the mass-produced things.
It doesn't matter that they're not a work of fine art, but these objects are still very important.
And it tells us so much about what people were thinking, about what they were feeling, but also about the attitudes of the society around that time.
The V&A's Theatre and Performance collection has nearly 3,500 stage costumes. Many of these were made to measure and not to last.
We own an enormous amount of material which is very, very fragile. One of the big problems is that most stage costume can be worn night after night on the road. A lot of it just gets thrown away because it just gets worn out. And so probably only a tiny proportion even exists nowadays.
It's hoped the latest donation to the museum will prove an important addition, as it's a rare survivor from one of pop's most flamboyant periods.
Ah, I can just see a little touch of red lurex poking through here. There you are. That fantastic outfit from Jim Lee, bass guitarist of Slade, one of the biggest bands of the 1970s.
Slade were an unstoppable force in the glam rock era.
They actually sold more singles in the 1970s than any other British band.
Bass player Jim co-wrote 17 consecutive hits with lead singer Noddy Holder, including 6 UK #1s. But the band were just as famous for their outlandish glam rock get-up as their music.
It's not going to fit me, unfortunately. But so isn't that lovely?
During a recent clear-out of his attic, Jim Lee rediscovered suitcases full of old touring gear, including this Lurex and Velvet number that he's now donating to the museum.
So this is really interesting. Here's the label, Granny Takes a Trip. That was the famous fashion shop on the King's Road. Let's see what else there is in here. Oh, what's this? There's the bill. £60 to pay, Jimmy Lee, Slade, red Lurex. Isn't that lovely? Tucked away in the pocket. It's been sitting in there all those years.
The suit bag contains another surprising relic from the glory days.
This is the sheet music for Squeeze Me, Please Me. I'm not going to sing it. They always used to misspell the song titles. My parents used to be outraged by this. I think the National Union of Teachers or somebody complained about it because they thought it was undermining the English language. Why is something like this so interesting to the V&A? Well, we're looking for things which evokes the era just beyond the person who wore it or the person who designed it. They were at this point when glam rock hit the music industry, and of course Slade were at the middle of it. This is the period where you've got Elton John and David Bowie, T-Rex, glam rock music. It's not too serious, they were really fun. And I think that's the key part of why glam rock was so popular and so successful.
But life on tour has taken its toll on the suit.
Hey, Jeff.
So textile conservator Joe needs to check it over before it can be photographed for the collection.
That's shiny, isn't it?
So were you a Slade fan in your younger days?
Well, growing up in the 1970s in the Midlands, you sort of had to be a Slade fan. They were enormous. So, yeah, it ain't Christmas till Noddy Older says so. That's what they say in the Black Country. They're referred to as Black Country royalty. So it's really quite thrilling to have that suit come into the studio.
Due to the fibre it's woven from, it's remarkable the suit has survived at all.
It's made out of a plastic lurex, and that material is not designed to last. Plastics just inherently degrade, and we will struggle to maintain that material.
The fragile fabric is showing signs of the suit's rock and roll past.
On the trousers, we've got that silvering where the guitar is rubbed against the outside of his leg.
It's always nice to have things which show
that it was used. Sometimes, for the sake of maintaining that object for the next generations, we have to intervene. Where the seam's popped, that might come apart again because the fabric is so shredded.
Are they really difficult to mend?
This is going to be difficult to mend, yeah, because there's nothing there to stitch back into.
Before the suit joins the collection, Jim Lee will visit the V&A to see it for one last time in all its splendour.
It makes a difference if the wearer's still alive because they can tell you how they wore it, what they chose to wear with it. I hope I get a chance to say hello to him and he feels that he's given his suit to a good home.
Across the museum's eclectic collections are hundreds of objects never intended to have a life beyond the artist's studio.
There are quite a number of objects in the V&A which started life as a temporary object, shall we say, as a working drawing, something that would be used in the final process of creating the painting or the tapestry. That's just as fascinating, just as valuable for us to understand how artists worked.
Some of these unintended works of art can be found in the V&A's treasury of rare watercolours from the Renaissance.
Most people think of oil paintings, Michelangelo's Sistine Chapel or Leonardo da Vinci Last Supper. But for many Renaissance painters, watercolour was the medium of choice.
Watercolour fades when exposed to light for too long, so to preserve these delicate works, they are stored away in the dark. Now curator Alania is hoping to bring these works to light in a new display of Renaissance watercolours, including one from a Flemish master that hasn't been shown for over a century. Christ, St. Paul and the Theological Virtues by Jacob Jordans is a working drawing for a much larger oil painting commissioned for a church in Antwerp.
We can recognise St. Paul holding a scroll, which is obviously a reference to his writings. There are these three female characters representing the theological virtues. You can see how the artist was going through different ideas. You can see what is called pentimenti, which basically means that the artist changed his mind. Perhaps he started depicting something in a way and then he realized it wouldn't work with the rest of the composition. So you can see when he tried again to try and perfect the composition to the level he wanted it. When you're looking at working drawings, it really feels like you are closer to the artist because you're sort of following what he was thinking at the time. And by you looking at that paper, it feels like you're much closer to something that was made 360 years ago. It's a great feeling.
Jordans was one of the great Flemish Baroque artists, alongside his contemporaries Rubens and Van Dyck. He was best known for his mythological scenes and religious altarpieces. This watercolour is now the only remaining record of Jordans' masterpiece, the final oil painting was lost when the church in which it hung was destroyed in a fire. But Alania's discovered the watercolour has historical damage of its own.
We do have some problems around the surface. The watercolour presents these white spots, which I'm not sure if they are actually the paper bleeding through or if it's a different kind of damage, perhaps insect-related. That you don't want people to look at something and the first thing they notice is there is something wrong with it. That's definitely not the reaction you want to have. I'm hoping that the conservators can come up with a solution. If there is no way for us to stabilize the drawing, we'd have to pull it out of the display. It would be a shame not to include it.
Before the pandemic struck, the V&A had opened a new exhibition celebrating the national dress of Japan, kimono. With some objects dating back to the 17th century, the display is a mix of contemporary and traditional kimono, cut from a single bolt of cloth.
Most of the garments we show in the kimono exhibition are the haute couture of their day. They were fashion. They weren't necessarily something that person would have worn beyond that year. They weren't made to end up in a museum. So it's remarkable that so many have survived for us to be bringing them back to life.
With objects flown in from all corners of the world, curating the display during a global pandemic hasn't always gone to plan.
There was one piece that just unfortunately didn't make it.
But the missing object has finally arrived, and it's hoped it will now get a second chance to join the exhibition, as soon the whole display will be going on a world tour.
Okay, surprisingly small box for what we hope will be a large kimono.
I can't really believe it's actually kind of finally arrived.
Oh, wow. That is pretty spectacular, isn't it?
It is.
This cotton robe with its vibrant West African wax print was created by Serge Mouang, designer of innovative kimono couture.
Seeing it unfurl, instantly you're just struck by the boldness of the blues and greens. When you look more closely, it's circles within circles that overlap. It's almost like a sort of optical illusion that gives three-dimensionality in the pattern. And then there's this extraordinary moment when you open it and you see this lining.
Oh, wow.
That's lovely.
I had no idea that it had this kind of embellishment on the lining, which is wonderfully luxurious detail.
Oh, exciting.
The team needs to display the kimono on a mannequin in a way that represents Serge's creative inspiration, a marriage of his Cameroonian heritage and adopted home of Japan.
The kimonos that I do, it's something that doesn't belong to the Japanese culture entirely or to the West African entirely either, but that has its own vibration, its own definition. And that's why I call it the third aesthetic, because it's somewhere between the two cultures.
The idea of the third aesthetic is at the heart of all Serge's Wafrika designs.
It's called Wafrika. Wa in Japanese is the old term for Japan. It means harmony. So it's like this sort of combination of the sophisticated heritage of the kimono form with the vibrancy of West African textiles and West African cultures.
That was the very first sketch. It all started with the lining idea. I wanted to have the lining to shine out of the kimono itself.
In historic kimono, the lining was a kind of secret luxury in a way, and often quite a seductive part of the kimono.
It's this idea that you just glimpse as somebody walked along, just at the ankle or at the sleeve ends.
You never really see the lining kind of coming out of the seams like this. So he's kind of taken that idea and really embellished it.
Yeah.
The other kimonos will soon be shipped fully mounted on their mannequins to Gothenburg, the first leg of the world tour. But before the Wafrika kimono can join them, it also needs to be dressed for its travels, according to the V&A's strict standards.
It might be surprising to know that we dress the mannequin before it reaches Sweden. They are packed, fully clothed. So at the other end, the exhibition expresses everything we wanted to say about these garments.
To dress this kimono properly on the mannequin will take a lot of time, and we don't have much time.
Serge will also need to give sign-off on the final look.
Usually I put the kimono myself. So my concern is, are they going to be able to capture the idea of Africa?
It's an extra challenge to satisfy the designer. It's quite nerve-wracking.
In textile conservation, Joe is starting the tricky repair of Jim Lee's red suit before it is mounted and photographed for the V&A online collections.
And one of the problems is the material itself, because it's sort of plastic, basically. Trying to do the things that you do with cotton, you just can't do it with materials like that.
The fabric is too weak to hold the stitches, so Joe is reinforcing it with a silk patch.
It's not so much sewing it back together as sewing it down to the patch so that it doesn't get any worse.
Joe needs to ensure any repair is invisible.
This is a thread called Scala, which is quite strong, but it's also translucent, so I think it's going to vanish quite well.
But after 30 minutes of meticulous stitching, and with the repair almost complete,
Nope, taking that out. It's not good enough. I think I need to switch to a finer thread. This is too heavy. Right, let's go to the cupboard.
Joe goes in search of a solution in her conservator's box of tricks.
Nothing's ever made or designed for conservation. We run along behind the truck of technology, waiting for things to drop off the back. And Stable Text is one of those things. It's actually made, I think, for the food industry. It's like a very, very fine sieve. It's very transparent. If you pull the threads out of it, it makes a great sewing thread.
But it's so fine, it's almost invisible to the naked eye.
Right, here we go. Going in. Oh my Lord, I can't see that. Right. I look like someone who's miming sewing. It's a struggle to sew with Stable Text at the best of times, but because the fabric is so shiny, I'm having to move the thread and move the needle so that the light catches the thread and I can see where it is.
When conservation is complete, Jim's era-defining red suit will join the costumes of other 70s rock legends. Jim Lee joined the group in 1966, but playing bass in a rock band was a departure from his formal training as a classical musician.
I started musical life playing the violin. Here's my original violin. When I was a boy, you see it's very tiny, look.
You hit me in a spot and smile the smile you got, 'cause I love you.
Slade first topped the charts in 1971, but it wasn't until Jim donned the red suit and the band went full glam that they became rock royalty.
I think the first time I would have worn it would have been Come On Feel the Noise. That was my calling card, if you like, in the band. The trouble with this suit was that it looked great, but it certainly wasn't for doing anything but just looking great in it. As soon as you started doing this, it would rip. I must have bought 12, maybe 15 over the time I was wearing the red suit. The boss of Granny Takes a Trip used to love me. Yeah, Jim's back in again, you know, be rolling the money.
The red suit currently under repair at the V&A is the only one to survive Slade's raucous gigs. But no glam rock outfit would be complete without 3-inch platform heels.
Those shoes with the suit, that was the whole thing together.
Having recently been unearthed in his brother's lockup, the platforms will soon be reunited with the suit.
I'm a bit cross-eyed. That was not easy. But that looks okay. I'm happy with that. I hope Jim Lee's happy with it as well.
My mum, she was always a bit disappointed in me because I didn't play in an orchestra and joined the band, of course. And she sort of, in a way, almost never forgave me, really. She's 95, and I told her that the red suit was going to be given to the V&A, and she was over the moon. I was forgiven. Forget all the number ones, forget the gold discs.
Preserving objects made of fragile materials beyond their intended lifespan requires special conditions to keep them safe on display. Sensors operate 24/7 at the museum, measuring temperatures and humidity across all 145 galleries.
There are a number of objects that are particularly sensitive to temperature.
The key ones for us in the sculpture collection are the waxes.
We get anxious when the temperature starts to rise above 25 degrees.
Those waxes will start sweating and looking very uncomfortable.
In the Wolfson Gallery, one of the jewels of the V&A's collection is conspicuous by its absence. This cherished object was rushed into cold storage at the start of the pandemic, for fear it could melt if the temperatures rose while the museum was closed. After 5 months, it's safe for it to come out of hibernation. This 500-year-old wax was modelled by the great Renaissance master, Michelangelo.
The Michelangelo wax is probably one of the treasures of the museum. It's quite an iconic object.
Curator Peter and conservator Victoria are tasked with returning this extremely fragile object to its rightful place in the gallery.
It's very exciting to be able to take it out of store again. As curators, we are very attached to the objects. We think about them, you know, that we're very close to the objects.
Moving an ancient object made of brittle wax needs to be done with the utmost care.
Is it supporting you?
Yeah, no, I think it's all right. It's not a process that you can rush.
The journey from the store to the gallery has to be carefully planned.
The floor in those basement corridors is quite uneven, so it can be quite bumpy. The trolley doesn't have the best suspension in it, so big bump. Just be really kind of calm.
Another bump. Okay. So you have to stay very, very focused. You don't want anything distracting you. No one wants to be even there when an object gets damaged, let alone play any part in it. So it's best not to get too nervous about handling objects like this because you need to focus on keeping them safe. There, well, we've arrived. Very smooth journey.
Don't knock the trolley.
The young slave was one of over 40 large-scale statues designed for the tomb of Pope Julius II. Originally planned as a grandiose 3-story freestanding structure for St. Peter's in Rome. Plagued by setbacks, the project was finally scaled back to a modest wall monument located in a different church. The young slave was one of several sculptures left out of the final scheme, and so never fully emerged from its marble block.
The back was never carved, whereas the back of this little sketch model has been worked up by Michelangelo. So it gives us a really exciting idea of what he intended for that finished marble. It's the physical presence of the creative process of an artist. It's where mind and hand somehow come together, and from as simple a material as wax, you can conjure up this extraordinary figure in motion.
Due to the innate instability of wax, very few preparatory models have survived from the Renaissance.
It was never intended to last. That's what's quite charming and quite remarkable about it, that the artist probably had absolutely no clue that it would survive for several more centuries beyond him.
This Michelangelo wax is one of a rare group of survivals from his creative process, partly because he destroyed a lot of them himself. Fortunately, some of his contemporaries and close friends did manage to keep hold of some. They wanted to own something that was an example of an artist's creativity. And what more could you want than something by the greatest artist of the time, which was Michelangelo.
Before being returned to its case, the wax model sculpture needs to be closely examined.
It's been in store for a long time, and we just want to be sure nothing has changed in its condition.
Its age and fragility means any conservation work is a risky proposition.
The problem with wax is it is quite difficult to treat and to repair when it gets damaged. You can't bond it in the normal way with an adhesive, and you can't kind of remelt it. So it is extremely fragile from that perspective.
We're hoping we're not going to find anything untoward when we look at it. If we notice any issues, then we probably won't be able to put it on display.
In the paper workshop, Alania has asked conservator Alan to inspect the blemishes found on the Jordaan's watercolour.
It was the first time I'd actually seen it. As you looked at what should have been an amazing drawing, your eye was taken to the white dots. And of course, that's not what we want. It could be some kind of chemical damage, or it could be insect damage. Silverfish could have eaten part of the surface.
If it is an insect or something that is still within the paper, then obviously it is a different kind of treatment that it would need. We need to be able to make sure that it's stable.
Under the microscope, Alan sees more than spots before his eyes.
Looks like a collector's mark here. Do you want to have a look?
Yes, please. Uh-huh. Right in the middle of the drawing?
Right in the middle of the drawing.
Isn't it weird? It was common practice when the drawings came into most museums to be marked. And this normally happened at bottom right or bottom left. It does look like a V&A mark. It's got a crown.
And you've got the letters interwoven, haven't you? Like
Yes.
the V and the A
the
and
V
the
and
M.
the A and the M. And what is surprising is that we did it right in the middle of the drawing.
We wouldn't do that nowadays.
How peculiar.
Curious.
The placement of the V&A collector's mark remains a mystery. But on closer inspection, Alan is able to rule out insect damage.
They're very clean, it's very white. So I think it's where the surface of the paper is very lumpy, and so the high points of the object had been rubbed down, leaving these little white marks on the surface of the paper.
It's probably been used in the workshop of Jordaan's. Perhaps lots of hands have touched it.
So what I would suggest is that we tone those down so that when it's displayed on the wall, the visitor will see the image rather than being focused on the white dots everywhere.
That'd be brilliant. Yeah.
Cool. It's quite a challenging job to do because the drawing is of a media where you can't easily do something that you can then reverse. If I used a watercolour, that might spread into the surrounding colours. So I'm going to use a dry, good quality watercolour crayon. Some people might think that I'm just colouring in these white dots, but I assure you there's a lot more to it than that. It's a far more complex approach.
It's definitely not easy to conserve a 360 years old drawing. These dots are fairly small and cover the whole surface of the drawing. There are perhaps 100, and I'm quite glad that the task doesn't fall on me.
The Wafrika kimono was delivered to the V&A carefully folded into a small box. It's spent the last 48 hours in textile conservation, having some stubborn creases slowly smoothed out. It's put the preparation for the exhibition tour behind schedule.
We have to immediately pass it over to the textile mounter, make sure Serge is happy with it, get it packed in its crate and shipped off with the rest of the show. All our lives are like that, though. There's always a deadline.
Textile display specialist Geza has the crucial role of mounting the kimono on a mannequin so that it's exhibition ready.
Dressing kimono is actually really an art form in itself. There is so much attention to detail needed. I really need to get it spot on. I've got a very, very tight schedule here.
First step, find the perfect mannequin.
This kimono was worn on a catwalk. The person was a rather slender, tall lady. Therefore, I'm going for a size 36, which is the smallest mannequin that we have.
Geza must prepare the kimono to withstand life on the road for up to 2 years.
There is gravity that you always need to keep in mind, so you need to create supports that fight against gravity. These little pads create a nicer line, but also give additional support to the kimono later on.
The origins of kimono date back to garments introduced to Japan by Chinese envoys in the 5th century. As dynasties rose and fell, kimono became increasingly stylized and spread beyond the ruling classes. By the Edo period of the 17th century, the making of kimono had become a thriving industry.
New kinds of designs, new techniques were developed. It was really the peak of sort of textile artistry in Japan. But it was also led by the trendsetters of the day, particularly kabuki actors. What they wore on and off stage was much emulated by their fans. So in a way, it was all fed by a celebrity culture. So this is fashion as we're familiar with.
But as trade with the West developed, so did the popularity of Western clothing, and the kimono largely faded from Japanese daily life.
In the post-war period, there was a real worry that people were sort of not knowing how to wear a kimono anymore. So kimono schools were set up which taught people how to wear a kimono. Particularly if they were going to a very special occasion like a wedding, they might well go to a kimono dresser to ensure that they were dressed correctly.
Training to become a kitsuke, a highly skilled professional kimono dresser, can take many years. But Geza's taken a crash course.
Before working on the exhibition, I have never dressed any kimono, but a Japanese advisor was working with us, so it was a wonderful opportunity to get the tricks of the trade. But it's been just the tip of the iceberg so far. You need to have a lot of practice, a lot of knowledge, and all this attention to details. I've got far too much excess of material here. I think I have to undo her again. I think the mannequin is too short.
There is a kind of grammar to kimono. The way you wear a kimono tells people different things about you, i.e. your marital status or your age and your taste.
It's essential that Geza uses the correct grammar.
The kimono wraps around the body, left side over right. It's very important that you remember because there's only one point the kimono is dressed right over left, and that's when you're dressing a corpse.
With the mannequin at the correct height and the kimono wrapped left over right, the next step is to add the ornate sash, known as the obi.
The obi is a long sash which is used to secure the kimono. It is tied in a very kind of expressive way at the back.
The Japanese have developed hundreds of intricate ways to tie the obi knot. And curator Josephine wants Geza to use a method that will complement the Wafrika kimono in the best way possible.
The obi style I would like us to try is this one.
It's tataya, which is the standing arrow.
I remember that. I loved that one.
Great!
I loved seeing it once it was done.
Yes.
The obi is key to the finished ensemble, so needs to be tied correctly if designer Serge is to give his blessing for the kimono to go on tour.
It looks very complicated, that's for sure, but I really, really need to make sure that I achieve the shape in the way it needs to be done.
I have ultimate faith that you're going to be able to master this.
I do like a challenge.
In the Wolfson Gallery, conservator Victoria has to give Michelangelo's wax model a thorough health check before it can go back on display.
I'm trying to see in as much detail as possible any changes to the surface of the wax, basically trying to make sure that nothing has happened to it since last time it was looked at.
Victoria soon makes a discovery. It appears Michelangelo hasn't just left his mark on history.
You can almost see fingerprints on his buttock here. Can you see just sort of in this little...
Yes. When you're dealing with these malleable materials like wax or clay, you quite often find fingerprints that could well be the fingerprints of the artist. It's like a direct connection with them. It's very exciting.
On closer examination, Victoria detects a more worrying imperfection.
His chest is quite
crusted.
Those sort of furry, sort of particulate, sort of bloomy sort of salts, and yeah.
Additives Michelangelo used in the wax to improve its malleability have seeped out.
We see different deposits. This shiny residue that is on the back and the salts on the front do change with different relative humidities.
Thankfully, the seepage isn't serious enough to require intervention. But some old wounds need closer scrutiny.
It's damage that we know about. I'm trying to see whether any of the old repairs have opened up or become slightly more misaligned. There's quite obvious repairs to his arm where it attaches to the shoulder, and then cracks close to his elbow.
In 1924, a visitor bumped into its display case, sending the model tumbling to the museum floor.
The glass in the case broke, the wax was left on the floor in bits, which must have been fairly horrifying.
The torso remained intact, but the wax model's limbs were broken into fragments.
I can't imagine how they must have felt having to be the person to put it back together and to make sense of it. Fortunately, the director had just had a set of photographs taken. Those formed the basis for the conservation. The job that was done was pretty amazing.
There are x-rays which reveal the pins that must have been added at the time, so that gives quite a good insight into how they actually repaired it.
The 100-year-old repairs appear to be holding up well.
Condition unchanged. It's survived the summer and it's ready to go back in its case, so it can be enjoyed and viewed by the public again. It's a bit sad to see an empty display case without the object, but it's the best approach in order to ensure that object continues to survive for the next 500 years.
Actually trying not to touch the wax if I can help it. It's both exciting and a relief to be able to put this back, see it looking glorious again.
We'll be monitoring the temperature and the relative humidity over the winter months to know that it's safe. 19.9 and 52.9, which is perfect.
Yeah. It's wonderful to see it back on display. That's where it belongs. Michelangelo's whole thinking was about this idea that you could move around a sculpture and have a wonderful view from any side. This has captured a sense of the anguish that he's going through
And yet it's just some little blobs of wax. And it really took a genius to create something that's so inspiring.
In textile conservation, Jim Lee's platform heels have arrived.
It's always nice when you get the whole set to have shoes as well. It makes the outfit because the platform shoes were such a big part of the glam rock look. I'm hoping they're in good condition. There's a limit to what we can do. We can make them look a little bit better, but I'm not a cobbler. They have new soles, a new heel. These are called risers, these little bits on the bottom. They're quite heavy though. Those are solid wood, those heels.
King Charles II was the trendsetter for men wearing high heels. A raised heel meant high status, as they were too impractical for a manual labourer to wear. 3 centuries later, men were once again standing tall during the glam rock era.
I'm told that to be in the height of trendy fashion these days, you've got to wear shoes like these.
Through the whole 19th and 20th century, men's dress is really dull, very sombre, very plain. And then there's this little splash from the late 60s to the late 70s where men wore really bright colours, really flamboyant clothes and high heels. The tongue has a split. That might have to be fixed because the leather's also getting quite brittle there and I don't want that to break and fall off. So I'm going to stick a little patch across the back of some Japanese tissue paper just to stop this split from getting any bigger. This is Japanese tissue paper. It's an incredibly strong paper with very, very long paper fibres, and it makes a really strong repair. And when you glue those down, it makes like a seamless edge. You can't see it. There we go. That's perfect for bonding to the leather.
A waterproof adhesive used in the plumbing trade is applied. The glue is slow drying, but Joe has a hands-free solution to help the tissue paper bond successfully to the leather.
While the adhesive and the repair is drying, we're going to clamp it all together with 2 tiny magnets. It's just like being pinched with a pair of fingers.
With the shoes repaired, Jim's suit now needs to be mounted on a mannequin. A precarious exercise with fabric this fragile. So Joe enlists help from textile display specialist Laura.
Do you want to have a leg each?
Yep, sure.
Yeah.
The 50-year-old Lurex is so delicate, just one snag could split it.
Mannequins don't bend. It's a bit like dressing a toddler. Putting trousers on can be quite a challenge.
So it's quite close, isn't it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There. Okay. Got it.
Watch out for that arm.
Right, come on. Up. Hello, hoop.
Okay. There we go.
We have to be very careful, especially with dressing the jacket onto the mannequin without stretching the back, because that repair could quite easily give way and then I'd be doing it again.
You should be able to go up that arm.
Yeah, he's got a conservation on the back of the shoulder. Just to... There we go. He looks all right, doesn't he? Looks busting.
Jim Lee will be casting his eye over the conservation work when the suit is photographed, before it finally joins the V&A collection.
I think he'll be surprised. I think he's going to have one of those I don't remember being that thin moments, because it is a very slim suit.
The installation of the Renaissance watercolour display is underway. In conservation, Alan has to complete the restoration of the Jordaan's preparatory drawing before it can join the exhibition.
We have a code of ethics in conservation. We approach our work with the intent not to do something to it where we are guessing, shall we say. What we're trying to do is just where we know that there's an area of loss and we can see around that area that it was a particular colour, then it's acceptable just to tone that missing part of the damage. We don't want the public to see something and assume that what they're seeing is the original work of art.
To respect the original painting, Alan needs to create a colour tone that perfectly matches pigments applied in the 17th century.
The watercolour pencils I'm using, they're quite distinct colours, and so I can't just use one of them. So within any of the white dots, I'm going to apply several different colours, and then under the microscope, I will use a brush, a dry brush, to blend those different pigments until you get a general tone rather than seeing the individual grains of red or blue or green. It is quite a privilege to be able to actually work so closely with a drawing and get to know the artist's technique. I love it. It's really satisfying when it's going well.
Having spent nearly 3 days painstakingly retouching more than 100 blemishes, Alan checks the Jordans under natural light to see if any remain visible to the naked eye.
It can be quite difficult to decide when it's finished. I think a conservator is looking in such detail at what they're looking at. We have to know when to say enough is enough.
Curator Elania must decide if Jordan's working drawing is now fit to join the exhibition.
So there you go.
Oh, wow. I don't think you can see them. It looks much, much better. Looking for the white spots, knowing that they were there, you know, I'd seen them. They're not there anymore. I can't see them anymore. It's just great. I remember there was one on the...
On the nose.
On the nose,
yeah, that was quite an obvious one, wasn't it?
That was quite a strong one, wasn't it? And I can't see it at all. I didn't think it was going to actually come out like this, which is great.
It's been a privilege to actually make it look better, if you like, to actually improve it so that when the public come and see it, they're not going to see those white dots everywhere. They're going to appreciate it in itself. So this is going to now go to the framers, and then I'll be ready to install in the display.
That's great.
Good. Excellent. Thank you.
It's the final day of the kimono exhibition before it gets packed up and shipped out to Gothenburg. The designer of the Wafrika kimono, Serge Muang, is scheduled to give sign-off on the display of his creation. But Geza still has to tie the obi knot, the most difficult stage of the mounting process.
What is knot is called Tadeya Musubi. It translates to something like standing arrow. This is the next one.
The standing arrow is the most common obi knot used with the forisode, a flamboyant long-sleeved kimono worn by young unmarried women, on which the Wafrika design is based.
It's this kind of wonderfully dynamic way of tying the obi. It has lots of folds, so it's a really great way of showing the beauty of the obi, but also is quite complicated.
It's a bit like origami. I had to do quite a little bit of homework. I watched quite a few tutorials online and read a few books. Yeah, I've been studying.
However, the kimono folding tutorials don't take into account the fine silk chosen by the designer Serge.
Normally, the material wouldn't be as soft and floppy. It actually doesn't have enough strength to hold itself up in the shape that I need. I need to find means and ways how to tie it securely so it'll stay in this shape and this form, not only for the display, but also for the period of touring.
You don't really get very far with a badly tied kimono. It'll all fall apart.
This is net covered in silk, and I'll feed it inside of this shape that will be sitting in there as well. And that just helps the material to hold its shape. This is what costume mounting is about, just trying to find a solution, an invisible solution. You know, in real life, I've been told that lots of Japanese women would store their purses and personal belongings in their obi, as well as in the sleeves.
With the obi bow now holding its shape, gazer can move on to the elaborate accoutrement.
The obiage is like a little scarf that sits just above the obi and disguises a pad that supports the obi knot. The obigime is a decorative cord that gets tied around the waist. It's pretty and decorative, but it also is there to support the knot. Having the obigime here, this part of the bow just wouldn't be possible for it to stay in place. Okay, I'm quite pleased with that. So I've now finished working on this kimono and I feel quite relieved. It looks rather good.
I think it looks wonderful. I am a bit nervous about what the designer will think. This is his work. I would be really devastated if he was just kind of thought, what have you done?
The Renaissance watercolours display is ready to open to the public. Jordan's Christ, St. Paul and the Theological Virtues has taken its rightful place amongst 60 other precious works of art.
It's fantastic to mount this kind of display, I think, here at the V&A. You get a chance to take out these objects who have been in storage for years. Some of them haven't been exhibited at all. Some of them haven't been seen for perhaps 100 years. So it's a good way to really get to know better our own collection and obviously let the public enjoy. So it's great all around, I think.
As watercolours are sensitive to light, extended exposure will cause fading. So the display will only run for 6 months.
In 100 years' time, they will still be there to be enjoyed by future generation, our grandchildren. I hope we're going to be able to see it in my lifetime again. Let's put it this way.
The Wafrika kimono is mounted, ready for designer Serge's sign-off. But getting his approval has been complicated by COVID travel restrictions.
I can't see anything yet.
Hi, Serge. How are you?
Hi, Anna. How are you?
Not too bad. Where are you at the moment?
In Paris.
Ah, nice. We're going to have to show him what we've done just by holding up the laptop. So I hope it works. I hope you can get a sense of what we've done, because it's very difficult with him not being in the room.
I'm very stressed, Anna. I've never done that before. Send something to someone so that they can do it their own way. My expectations are quite high.
Oh, okay. Well, I hope we can match them then.
So, here we go. Hopefully you can see. And I was really nervous, particularly as he didn't say anything.
Beautiful work.
But what he was really doing was taking it all in.
Very nicely tight and perfectly done.
It was a huge relief that he did approve.
I think you find a way to have the right contrast between the obi itself and obijime. It resonates with the rest of the kimono.
And now for the back.
Oh, this kind of tie is very suitable for this kimono. That's really nice. Can you try one thing though?
Yes.
Can you try to fold it in just a little bit?
Okay, hold on.
Can you try to fold it up to nearly the shoulder? You see? Yes, that's right. You're doing great, Anna.
We'll have to finesse this.
Aha! Now you see, it takes the kimono a little bit more into the African expression than before. What do you think, guys?
I really like it.
Yeah, just a little twist and everything changes.
Exactly.
That was something we would never have thought of ourselves, because it's not something you would naturally do with a kimono. But it really brought the garment to life.
You've done a terrific job. I thank you for that, and I'm very glad that the piece belongs to the V&A now.
Okay, thank
you so much. Bye.
The Watercolour ensemble will suggest a sort of new way of looking at kimono, a way forward, this idea that you can bring together different cultures and create something new that doesn't obscure either of those cultures, but actually celebrates them coming together.
With Serge's blessing, the Wafrika kimono can now be carefully crated up to join almost 300 other kimono-clad mannequins on the first leg of their world tour.
I feel very pleased knowing that the Wafrika kimono that I worked on can be admired by so many other visitors all around the globe.
It's quite sad seeing these things go because we grow very attached to them, but it is really good to know that more people will be able to see them, and I think it's really important that we make our collections as accessible as possible.
Jim Lee's red suit is back to its sparkling best and is being photographed for the museum's online collections. Today, Jim's paying a special visit to see his trademark outfit one last time.
Hi.
Hello, come in. Hi. Won't shake hands, but I'm Jeff.
I'm Joanne Hackett, I'm a textile conservator.
Are you?
So she's been the one that's been fixing it.
Oh, look at that. Looks fantastic. When I look at it there, I must have been a lot thinner.
Yeah.
Wow, look at that.
So it was split down there, about that long?
If anybody had told me that that could be done, I'd have said you're mad. It really is amazing.
This costume will be here, not just this year, next year, but his grandchildren and great-grandchildren will be able to come along and see a bit of their family's history.
I hope he's glad he donated it. It's a really interesting point in time, and I'm very glad that we have it. It makes a great addition to the collection.
It's like meeting an old friend, and it's astounding, absolutely astounding.
No, I'm glad you're happy.
Yeah, I am happy. Incredibly happy.
It was lovely to meet Jim. What a nice bloke. I'm so pleased he was happy with the conservation. It's so nice when people can see the objects they've given and the difference you've made to them.
Any chance of me getting a photograph for my mum with the suit?
Yeah, go on. I would have seen him so many times on the television when I was a little girl, so it's nice to meet him at last. Bit of black country pride.
Jim's suit can now take its place in the collection, alongside costumes worn by other legends of pop, as a shining symbol of the glam rock era. Next time, the museum's oldest teddy bear celebrates his birthday.
112, that's a good old age for a bear. Oh.
Some of the longest paintings the museum has ever displayed go on show.
Just the vastness of it makes me think, how can we actually tackle this in this very short length of time?
And a costume worn by Manuel from Fawlty Towers is brought to life.
Wow, hi Dad. You totally get the feel that he could just walk out and do the ke.
To find out what it's like to be a museum curator and have a go at curating the V&A's collection yourself, go to bbc.co.uk/secrets of the museum and follow the links to the Open University.